with them.
This meeting is recorded.
Just me? Okay. So that's pretty much the premise behind my dissertation, is that it started with an observation within myself, within my family of origin, within my social circles, within my clients. And then after I realized just how common traumatic mother-daughter relationships were, it grew into questions about why some mothers show up for their daughters in ways that are detrimental. As you know, that eventually grew into the dissertation that I am about to defend today, which is titled The Angry, Strong Welfare Queen Jezebel: How America's Historical Movements and its Gendered Racial Stereotypes Have Shaped African American Mother-Daughter Relationships. So the objectives of my research are to explore the lived daughterhood experiences of African American women who have experienced prolonged and repeated exposure to violence within their mother-daughter relationship. That's essentially the crux of what mother-daughter trauma is: it's sustained and ceaseless damage from a mother to her daughter. I also sought to uncover how the angry Black woman slash sapphire, strong Black woman slash superwoman, welfare queen, and Jezebel stereotypes, along with the events throughout American history that they emerged from, have influenced African American mothers' parenting habits. And then lastly, I sought to understand how African American women's traumatic experiences within their relationship with their mother have impacted them into adulthood, including the way that they parent their daughters. So there were several noteworthy findings that were made during the literature review. I've categorized them here, and I want to just go down the line and kind of give you some insight on what I found. When we look at African American cultural values, what stood out for me in the literature that I want to share with you all today is that the values of African Americans actually represent a hybrid of traditional African philosophies and cultural behavioral responses to the experiences of living in the United States. When we hone in on those African philosophies, we think of attributes like spirituality, unity, creativity, and community. However, when you focus your attention on the behaviors that African American people, specifically women, have had to adapt to survive in America, that's when things get pretty tricky. And that's pretty much, like I said, the crux of this research today. There were several quantitative studies that I came across during the literature review that highlight the impact of racial trauma on restructuring our identity, which can lead people to decrease their self-control and also cause people who are stereotyped to act out in ways that are uniform with the stereotypical expectations of them. And additional studies also highlighted that some African American women struggle to maintain family connections, friendships, romantic relationships, and that's because of ineffective interpersonal approaches, such as aggression in the form of bad attitudes, condescending speech, physical violence, and controlling tendencies. These features show up in all of their intimate relationships, according to research, including their relationship with their daughter, which is what we're talking about today. Actually, a qualitative study that was conducted in 2016 revealed that while African American daughters often learn resilience, and coping strategies from their mothers, their self-esteem and sense of relational security can be damaged in the process of them learning that. And that's usually because strength is prioritized over the actual maternalism. And that's something that was discovered in the study, but also revealed in other qualitative studies as well. Unfortunately, there's an expectation in African American families that children will protect their mother's reputation. And because of that, women who have traumatic relationships with their moms are more likely to use impression management techniques. And one of those is secret keeping. And unfortunately, that secret keeping, it makes them unable to seek community or help with the relationship that they're struggling with. And of course, that is extremely impactful to women. Research actually shows that secret keeping can lead to the duplication of harmful relationship patterns, which is essentially what intergenerational trauma transmission is. So if you think about it, I kept my mother's secret, so you, my daughter, need to also keep mine. It's kind of like a I scratch her back, so you scratch mine sort of thing. And when I think about it, I think of an intergenerational doing of favors that doesn't really favor anybody. It actually only favors the internal degradation of a family. So that's where our gendered racial stereotypes come in. Each of the studied stereotypes represent a different set of characteristics. So I'm only going to look at one right now because obviously I don't have the time to go through every single one and how it shows up, but let's pick Jezebel. So Jezebel, for instance, was the sexually immoral queen of Israel in the Bible. However, the use of her legacy in more contemporary times was done so by white slave mistresses to justify sexually exploiting, displaying, and attaching monetary value to the bodies of African American women. The logic behind that was that if African American women were deemed erotic and promiscuous, then they could be considered unrapeable, and thus they'd be subjected to unthinkable sexual violence without their perpetrators needing to feel remorse for doing so. Within this study, there were daughters who identified linkages between their mother and the Jezebel stereotype, and they did so because their mother forsook parenting responsibilities for sexual exploits. So, for instance, one participant recounted a time when her mother put her out of the house and into the snow. She actually had to stay in the car for several days, and she did so for what the daughter called a dick appointment. So, I could go on and on, like I said, about the historical events surrounding each of the studied stereotypes. But of course, this is limited time, so I'll digress. But if we simply look at Jezebel's stereotype in particular, it impacted mother-daughter relationships by redirecting the gaze of some mothers from their daughters and onto their sexual desires. And based on literature as well as participant responses, it has also caused some mothers to shame their daughters into distancing themselves from their natural bodily desires in order to avoid being labeled fast. And it's also led to things like restrictive dress codes, body shaming for women who just have more voluptuous shapes, and then also family influence intimacy decisions. There was actually one participant who spoke about how, they had a family meeting about her sex life when, her parents started to think that she was having sex. So these are the kinds of things that are influenced by that stereotype. From a systemic perspective, I think we see two things here, which number one is African American women being in historically marginalized financial positions and kind of becoming conditioned to use their bodies to gain access and resources. And then secondly, we also see the confusion surrounding African American women historically being punished and celebrated for their bodies that can influence mothers to protect their daughters by preaching chastity. So those are a couple examples of the adaptive survival behaviors and how incongruous that they are to the values of African American people. And they've essentially just become interwoven into the experience of being a woman of African descent in American society. So for this study, I chose three interpretive frameworks. The first was Black feminist thought, which is a critical social theory constructed by Patricia Hill Collins, and it empowers Black women to combat the negative stereotypical representations or controlling images of them by engaging in the process of self-definition. The controlling images that Collins highlights in her work actually mirror those that are examined in this study, and her call to action around self-defining inspires Black women to create safe and affirming spaces where they can storytell and express themselves without the risk of being objectified or silenced, which is essentially what this study did. It was really important that I included Black feminist thought in my work to act as a roadmap for how to broach such a sensitive topic. As we all know, mothers and the things that they do are very taboo subjects because you will often hear, but that's your mom. And that's something that came up as I was interviewing the participants. The second theory that I chose to guide this study is terror management theory, which pretty much opines that all humanity is on a quest to outlast death, which we each do by holding strong to our cultural perspectives. Articulating how this theory connected to my research was a little bit challenging because it is such an existential perspective. But if we hone in on how important it is for African American women to pass strength and resilience down to their daughters, we're able to see that many of the aggressive ways that they do so are merely rooted in feelings that there's no other way to become strong than through adversity. And then harshness simply becomes a rite of passage. And it also becomes an effort to maintain the legacy of the women in a family reputation for being strong Black women and super women. So essentially strength and the adversity that comes along with it is just like our way of leaving behind a rich legacy. Lastly, I also chose to use social learning theory, which simply states that the behavior is learned in environmentally and socially through role model intimidation. So a daughter's mother is usually her first role model. And when that mother creates a household culture that is centered on inflicting pain, punishment, and humiliation in order to teach resilience, it can result in a strong daughter, but that kind of depends on who's defining the word strength. but it also is likely to produce a daughter who feels endangered, powerless, unloved, and who is ill-equipped to model anything but those same things to her daughters. And that further perpetuates cycles of intergenerational mother-daughter trauma transmission under the guise of strength. Okay. So for the research design of my study, I chose a phenomenological approach. Try saying that word fast, but that is a approach that focuses on how a phenomenon, in this case, mother-daughter trauma, is perceived and understood by those who are living it. I conducted virtual interviews via Zoom, and I used an interview guide with questions exploring how participants' self-concept, their mental health, their interpersonal relationships, and their behaviors as a parent were impacted by their relationship with their mother. Although I was prepared to ask participants to identify other participants to participate in the study, which is known as snowball sampling, I was actually able to recruit all the participants I needed to reach through purpose of sampling. So I posted an institutional review board approved flyer to my public social media sites, and I announced that I was seeking to interview African American women ages 18 and older who were residents of Colorado, DC, Maryland, Tennessee, and Virginia. And the reason that I focused on those states is that those were the only states I could find therapists who specialized in mother-daughter trauma. And with this being such a sensitive topic, it was important for me to give the participants a list of resources that they would be able to lean on should our conversation become distressful to them. So I didn't want to get participants outside of the areas that there were specialty therapists in. So I looked for participants in that area, and those participants also had to self-identify as having experienced repeated mental, emotional, spiritual, and or physical trauma within their relationship with their mother. As a result, I recruited 20 potential participants, and ultimately I only conducted interviews with 16 of those. The difference in who was recruited and who participated was merely just people didn't respond once I, reached back out with the information about how to schedule. And I actually reached saturation by my 6th interview, but there's such an absence of research surrounding this topic, so I actually made the executive decision to continue to include all of the remaining participants in the study. I figured it couldn't hurt because there's not much research in this area. So my sample included, as I stated, 16 African American women. Their ages ranged from 29 to 47 with a mean age of around 36. 5 participants were married. 1 was in a long-term dating relationship. 1 was separated. 1 was divorced, and 8 reported that they were single. 8 participants had at least 1 daughter, and 15 participants reported that their mother had an undesirable relationship with their maternal grandmother. It's also important to note that there were participants who did not have children, as well as participants who had boys as their children and not daughters. So we didn't talk too much around their parenting habits because I was specifically looking at how mothers parent their daughters in light of the trauma that they experienced in their relationship with their mom. So some of the words that the participants used to describe their relationship with their mother were surface level, estranged, ghetto, and complicated. And as I previously mentioned, I used an interview guide to speak with each participant, although I did ask follow-up questions for clarity purposes. So our conversations were different from participant to participant, depending on how they responded to the structured question. Uh-oh, going a little too fast. Okay, so for my data analysis, I actually transcribed each interview, and it was easy to do. Zoom automatically does that for you. And those interview transcriptions went through several rounds of coding where I was seeking to discover patterns in the data. I initially scrubbed each transcript alongside its respective audio recording just to make sure everything was accurate. We know that sometimes the African American vernacular is not coded or transcribed properly, so I wanted to make sure that what was present on the transcripts was actually correct. And once the transcripts were finalized, I did 1 round of open coding, and I apologize if y'all can hear my daughter because she's screaming right now, but one of them is. I did 1 round of open coding to begin making connections between the interviews, and then I did 2 rounds of axial coding to break down core themes, and ultimately, I finalized my data analysis by preparing synthesized summaries of each emerging theme along with an anonymized quotes that I wanted to add to the findings chapter of my dissertation. I actually did pass those quotes along with the synthesized summaries along to 3 therapists who just went through them to make sure that I coded properly. And those therapists actually did help me with coming up with the research questions as well. So, 5 themes emerged from my research. I want to give a trigger warning before I go into telling you all about each one of these because I am sharing participant quotes and they're not pretty. So just be aware of that. The first one was internal conflict, and that refers to the cognitive dissonance that participants reported feeling surrounding their relationship with their mother that led them to question themselves and their perceptions. Now, that the questioning of perceptions and self was not only isolated to their relationship with their mother, it actually ended up boiling over into other aspects of their lives as well. And one participant in particular shared, and let me read this exactly as it said. When I confronted my mom so we could heal, she said she was a great mother to me and has never caused me any trauma. But she has done so much, from brutal beatings to calling me terrible names to spreading lies about me. Does she not remember that, or am I remembering everything wrong? Was it all a dream? Maybe I'm crazy. So many of you listening may know this as gaslighting. That's what I would call it if I were a therapist in that setting. But this participant reported significant struggles with trusting herself and deciding what is it real across all spheres of her life. So just that one experience, which obviously represents a number of experiences that she had with her mom, she couldn't trust herself. She didn't know, what was real, what wasn't. And that kind of feeds into the impacted livelihood, which we'll get into later. So the second finding was coping through physical loss or figurative loss, excuse me, was another theme that emerged. And it only emerged amongst a subset of participants who had decided to go no contact with their mother and essentially live their lives as if she no longer existed. One participant said of this, I know that she's out there somewhere. I'm not being delusional or denying her existence. I'm just saying I didn't get free until I accepted that we're nothing to each other and mourned that reality. And although there were not too many participants who had decided to go no contact, there were actually only 5 out of the 16. There were other participants who had decided to set boundaries with their moms. And they actually did describe a painful process of coming to terms with the fact that they lacked her support in specific areas of their lives that really was similar to the entire figurative loss that people who went no contact had to do. So that was a theme that emerged as well. Additionally, there were women who could not fathom not having their mom in their life. And even though they did not cope through figurative loss, I saw that their refusal to kind of accept what was going on and maybe make some of the decisions that would be necessary for them to live a full life was in avoidance of having to figuratively lose her. So in many ways, coping through figurative loss was a theme. Also, there was detached mothering. That was a very significant theme, which highlighted that the sentiment expressed by most participants that the way that their mother interacted with them and the discipline tactics that she used were not maternal. So they really just felt that she was detached. Like, if you really were being motherly, how would you be able to treat me this way or interact with me in this way? Participants described times when their mothers lied on them, called them names, gossiped and spread rumors about them, brutally beat them, pulled guns on them, refused to talk to them for periods of time up to multiple months. And during those times, they may have been going through difficult things like pregnancy. One participant even shared that although she grew up in a 4-bedroom home and she said it was her sister, her mom and dad. So, one would think that each person has their own room. Maybe the parents sleep together and there's a guest room. But her mother actually made her sleep on the floor and told her not to touch anything. So these are examples of the detached mothering. Another participant shared that she kept a lunch baggie full of hair that her mother pulled out of her head. And I want to share a more detailed quote from this participant because I think it captures so many of the stories that I heard. She said, my mom has always called me a bitch. She's always told me I'm ugly. And when I was growing up, she would yell crazy stuff out the window when I was going to the school bus stop. One time she yelled out the window that I had STDs. That's how I started running away because I'd gotten to the point where I said to myself, she usually falls asleep smoking cigarettes. So I'm just going to set her bed on fire. When I started having that thought, I was like, something has to give. And I get chills just saying that because I'm visualizing that experience for her. As you can imagine, enduring the trauma that the participants recounted within your relationship with your mother can have lasting impacts on you. This is the premise of the theme Impacted Livelihood. Participants highlighted manifestations of their mother daughter trauma in 6 areas: their finances, their friendships, their romantic relationships, their parenting, their health, and their spirituality. The top 3 life areas that participants reported were impacted by their relationship with their mother were their friendships with other women, their romantic relationships, and their parenting. So I'll share one participant quote from each area, and I'll start with friendships with other women. So one participant said about her friendships with other women, I used to be very jealous. I will say that that came from my relationship with my mother. I feel like it made me very insecure and jealous of other women for a long, long, long time. Like one of my friends was getting married and I couldn't figure out why she was getting married because I felt like I was the better person. So I just stopped talking to her. So participants not only talked about times where they would be jealous of their friends, just cut people off without notice or trying to have a conversation with them, but also just not even wanting to engage with other women due to having trust issues and, kind of thinking that women would treat them the way that their mothers would. Another thing that came up that I thought was interesting was the avoidance of making female friendships because of feeling that they wouldn't be able to get out of them if they turned bad, because obviously it's really hard to get out of your relationship with your mom when that turns bad. So some women would avoid even making friends because if it got sour, they wouldn't know, how do I get unstuck from this situation? So another participant actually reported that in her relationship with her mother, it made her more tolerable to abuse within her marriage. And that was the reason she found through therapy that she chose a partner who hit her, raped her, and name called her. When discussing parenting, most of the participants without daughters admitted that they were terrified to have a daughter for fear of recreating toxic cycles. Some participants with daughters reported that they have replicated their mother's behaviors as well. They also admitted that they felt obviously very guilty for doing so and would feel senses of self hatred after doing something that reminded them of something that their mom would do. One participant said that she was a very do as I say parent to her daughter, who she identified as now an adult, and she didn't allow her daughter to have a voice and realizes now that may be why her daughter is not a productive or contributing member of society. So she talked a lot about her daughter having a hard time finding a job, really living at home, after what she believes is not the age that her daughter should be living at home. And she was able to connect that back to her not helping her daughter cultivate the ability to make decisions. The last theme that came up from the research was societal influences. And I'm really surprised that my voice is lasting this long, y'all. But it societal influences, which capture how parent participants believe the world sees African American women, and then how those perspectives impact their relationship with their mother. So most participants during what kind of generated this as a theme, most participants spoke about strength and how the need to be perceived as strong, they feel often cause their mother to miss out on opportunities to connect with them. Others mentioned that their mother's reliance on public assistance, and they kind of shared their thoughts about how that may have caused their mother to herself from them and be jealous of them as they became more educated and successful. So those particular participants spoke about how their moms would make comments about how she deserved, to make such and such amount of money that they might have been making, but never really put motivation forth towards getting more education or, trying to find a better job or anything, just sort of spewed out or projected hatred and jealousy. Several participants also talked about how their mother put on a facade of friendliness to the outside world, but was very angry and mean toward them. And in the midst of this, I want to note that not all of the participants explicitly named the gender racial stereotypes that are being studied or were being studied, but their responses suggested that they were parented by mothers who displayed behaviors associated with the stereotypes. So when I heard words like angry, even if the word or the phrase angry Black woman wasn't utilized, obviously I knew that related to the angry Black woman stereotype. And when I heard women talk about how their mothers, for instance, one participant spoke about how her mom really scammed the government a lot and would get disability checks and kind of taught her daughter how to navigate the system instead of trying to go find a job and be productive. That obviously made me think of the welfare queen stereotype when I was doing my interpretation of the data. All righty, we're almost done. So as I reflect on this study, I'm really proud of pretty much how impossible to ignore the context is that it brings to social science research. And when I consider what social workers like myself can do to continue attending to this long overlooked population, my mind goes in so many different directions. When you look at social work, we are a three-tier profession. We have the micro, the meso, and the macro. With micro, that is direct work with individuals who are impacted by, in this case, mother-daughter trauma. Meso would be community organizations and things of that nature. And then macro would be looking at government institutions or large organizations and how change can be done in those particular institutions as well. I can come up with so many ideas, but I think that considering that there is an absence of research in this area, the best thing that we can do is continue to create safe spaces like the ones that I created in this research study so that women can openly and without punishment share their truths about their mothers. I did have several participants who spoke of going to therapists who didn't quite understand where they were coming from regarding their relationship with their mom, or, maybe didn't even ever try to because of their own cultural biases. And one of the ways that I think social workers would be able to attend to this population better is through the development of some sort of CE classes in order to help social workers know how to listen. Of course, this talk about mothers can be extremely triggering for those who may have complicated relationships with their moms or even our moms themselves. But I think if there's more education surrounding how to attend to the mother-daughter trauma population, then obviously we'll be able to incite more change. I think that also those conversations don't only have to happen or be facilitated by social workers. We all on this call have a role because we all have friends. When I asked to put in the chat if you knew someone or if you are someone who has mother-daughter trauma, people answered. So that obviously means that we all can open our heart and our ears to provide safe spaces for these women as well. I also want to show you all this framework. As we previously discussed, women with mother-daughter trauma experience deficits in their career and finances, their friendships, their romantic relationships, their parenting, their health and spirituality. And so there's so much that can be done across multiple disciplines to ensure that women with mother-daughter trauma transition into adulthood well-equipped to care for themselves and build satisfying connections with others, including their daughters. To aid in designing interventions for African-American women with mother-daughter trauma, I created this intervention development framework, which I call the 6 dimensions of thriving. And it outlines 6 areas of mother-daughter trauma manifestation that emerged from my interviews with participants. And it also considers the dialect of African-American women. Hence, you can see the use of the word bank to describe career and finances, so on and so forth. So I would encourage you all to utilize this in your respective professions. Just make sure you cite me, okay? Because I certainly will use it as I continue to raise awareness about mother-daughter trauma and strive to be the best social worker that I can. All right. So in closing, I would like to dedicate this dissertation and the life's work that will result from it to my estranged and now deceased mother's inner child. I know she never planned to grow up and replicate her mother's parenting behaviors, but without the community and solutions that my work is creating, she was doomed to. And I don't know if y'all can see what I'm about to show you because I can't see y'all, I can only see my PowerPoint. But the day my mom passed, I actually got a tattoo that says, "I'll fight you for you." And essentially that's what I did. To the very end, I held her accountable, I stuck to my boundaries, and I refused to reward her refusal to change with my presence. And I stood up to the adult version of her for her inner child, for my inner child, and for my daughters and all the daughters in our family that will come after us. So my curse is broken, and I pray that each of you will hold space for other women to break theirs. Thank you.
We still have some people who are in the rooms, but we are going to go ahead and conclude. Dr. Dylesia has successfully defended her dissertation, so it's my honor to introduce Dr. Banner to you all. And yeah, so congratulations, Dr. Banner.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations,
Thank
Dr.
you.
D.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Let's go.
Congrats.
Thank you so much, y'all. My voice
No,
is
thank you
crackling.
so much for really, it's been such an honor to serve on your dissertation and to see you do work so hard and put so much heart and soul into this work, and you are going to be making a difference in the world. This is you could tell from how excited everybody was in the room to ask questions, and this is work that is really going to be making a difference for many of our communities.
Thank
Congratulations
you so
again.
much.